It's 2004. In a small, quiet neighborhood in Stillwater, Minnesota, lived a family that, to everyone's eyes, seemed straight out of a postcard of happiness. The Thompsons, Jack, Mary, and their only daughter, Emily, lived in a Victorian-style house at the end of a street lined with poplar trees. Jack was a carpenter known for his skill and dedication, while Mary worked as a teacher at the local school. Emily, on the other hand, was a sweet, quiet girl who loved reading and spending time in the garden with her mother. Jack and Mary met in 1995 at a women's woodworking workshop. Jack was the instructor, and Mary, who had always had an interest in crafts, decided to sign up as a hobby. It was love at first sight, and a year later they were married in a simple but emotional ceremony. In 1997, Mary became pregnant with Emily, her only daughter. Emily was born on March 12, 1998, a sunny day that Mary would always describe as the happiest of her life. From an early age, Emily seemed to have a special glow. She was curious, intelligent, and loving. She would spend hours playing in the backyard, building little shelters out of branches and leaves, or reading storybooks she checked out from the local library. In the early years, the Thompsons were inseparable. They would spend weekends having picnics in the park or working on woodworking projects in Jack's workshop. Mary, passionate about teaching, taught Emily to read before she was 4. "She's always been a precocious child," she said proudly. However, the true bond between mother and daughter was forged in the garden. Mary had a small vegetable patch where she grew flowers and vegetables, and Emily often helped her. She always liked red flowers, Mary would recall years later in a somber tone, especially poppies and tulips. When Emily turned 13, something began to change. She no longer wanted to spend so much time with her parents. Instead of helping in the garden or working in the woodworking shop, she preferred to lock herself in her room. Children's books were replaced by mystery and true crime novels. Although this worried Mary a little, Jack dismissed it. "It's just a phase," he said. "All teenagers become a little withdrawn." But Mary couldn't ignore the signs. Emily stopped inviting friends over, and her behavior became increasingly unpredictable. There were days when she was sweet and talkative, but other days when she responded in monosyllables or simply sat quietly staring out the window. In 2013, when Emily turned 15, she started keeping a diary. Mary found it one day while cleaning, but when she opened it, she saw that all the pages were filled with dark scribbles and drawings. Eyes that seemed to watch from the shadows, human figures trapped in mazes, and disjointed phrases like "fear is power" or "red flowers must always grow." Although Mary was disturbed, she decided not to say anything. She thought it best to respect her daughter's privacy. However, the drawings would haunt her at night. What did those phrases mean? Why, of all the colors, did Emily always choose red? In mid-2014, something happened that would mark a turning point. Emily came home with a red stain on her sweater. When Mary asked her what had happened, Emily replied coldly, "It's paint." However, the texture of the stain and the metallic smell made Mary suspect that it was not paint, but blood. But once again, she said nothing. Jack, for his part, remained oblivious to the changes in Emily. Always busy with his workshop, he did not notice his daughter's furtive glances or the fact that she was spending more and more time away from home, especially at night. By 2015, the atmosphere in the Thompson home was tense. Mary tried to keep up appearances, but she felt that her daughter was increasingly distancing herself from them. Emily became more reserved, even hostile, when Mary tried to start conversations. For his part, Jack tried to keep the peace. "It's just a phase," he repeated like a mantra, although deep down he was beginning to doubt his own words. One night, while eating dinner, Emily said something that left Mary cold. "Do you think some people deserve to die?" she asked, slowly twirling her fork on her plate. Jack laughed nervously, trying to take the question as a joke, but Mary couldn't help but feel a chill. In the summer of 2016, the Thompsons made one last attempt to bring the family back together. They rented a cabin on Lake Superior and spent 2 weeks fishing, swimming, and hiking. During those days, Emily seemed to be her old self again. She smiled, talked to her parents, and even helped Jack build a swing set in the backyard of the cabin. But that peace was short-lived. Soon after returning to Stillwater, Emily returned to her distant demeanor. She began going out at night more often and coming home later and later. When Mary tried to confront her, Emily simply ignored her or said, "It's none of your business." One day, while cleaning out the basement, Mary noticed that several tools were missing from Jack's workshop. Among them were a hammer, a screwdriver, and a small saw. When she asked Jack, he simply assumed she had lent them to a client or left them somewhere else. But Mary wasn't convinced. She began to suspect that Emily had taken them, though she couldn't imagine what for. By the fall of 2016, Mary couldn't ignore the signs. Emily, now 18, had become completely unpredictable. She often left the house without explanation, and when she returned, she seemed more withdrawn than ever. Jack tried to remain calm, but even he began to worry. "Maybe we should talk to someone," he suggested one night. But Mary, her heart torn between love and fear for her daughter, insisted they could handle it on their own. Things changed dramatically one November afternoon, when Mary, cleaning Emily's room, discovered something that would not only alter her perception of her daughter, but would put the stability of the entire family in jeopardy. It was around 3 p.m. Emily had left home early and had not returned yet. Taking advantage of the time, Mary decided to organize her daughter's room, which was messy like never before. While removing a pile of old clothes from the closet, she noticed something strange: a small wooden box, carefully hidden under a blanket. Intrigued, she opened it. Inside the box was a black book, old and worn-looking. The leather cover was scuffed, and a metal clasp held the book closed. Although she felt a pang of guilt, Mary couldn't resist the temptation to open it. What she found inside paralyzed her. The pages were filled with photographs taped together. They were images of people: men, women, and in some cases, teenagers. Most of them seemed to be photographs taken without the subject's knowledge, in parks, on the streets, and even inside cafes and restaurants. Next to each photo, Emily had written detailed notes: names, dates, and locations. But the most disturbing thing were the descriptions: weak, easily manipulated, lives alone, no close family, takes the same route every night. It seemed like Emily had been studying these people, like a predator studying its prey. In the last pages of the book, Mary found something even more disturbing: photographs of the same people, but in clearly violent situations. Some were bound, others had visible wounds. In one of the images, a woman appeared with her eyes closed and a dark pool around her head. Mary dropped the book and stepped back, her breathing quickening. Her hands shook, and she felt the walls of the room closing in around her. What did it all mean? Could Emily be responsible for something so horrendous? Her mind tried to search for explanations, but the images and notes were undeniable. At that moment, she remembered the past incidents: the red stain on the sweater, the missing tools from the workshop, the dark drawings in Emily's journal. It all fit, but Mary didn't want to accept it. How could a mother even imagine that her daughter could be involved in something so monstrous? When Emily returned that night, Mary tried to act normal. She made dinner and sat with her at the table, even though her mind was miles away. As she watched her daughter, she searched for signs of the person she had raised. Was it possible that Emily was capable of such extreme evil? "Where were you today?" Mary asked, trying to make her voice sound casual. Emily looked up, and for a moment, her eyes seemed to flash with suspicion. "With some friends," she replied, shrugging. But Mary knew she was lying. That night, after everyone had gone to sleep, Mary returned to Emily's room and looked through the book again, this time more closely. On one of the pages she found a name she recognized: Sarah Whitman. She was a woman who had been reported missing on the local news a few months earlier. Mary remembered seeing a segment about Sarah on television. According to the report, she had gone for a run in Stillwater Park one Saturday morning and never returned. As she continued to read, Mary found details about Emily's plans to attack Sarah. The notes talked about how she had gained her trust by pretending to be a jogging partner, and how she had tricked her into taking her to a secluded area of the park. The words were methodical, almost clinical, and lacking any trace of empathy. Mary could barely breathe. She knew she had to make a decision, but what could she do? Confront Emily directly? Talk to Jack? Call the police? All options seemed impossible. The next day, while Jack worked in the shop and Emily was at school, Mary sat in the kitchen with the book in front of her. Each page seemed to weigh more than the last. She was torn between her duty as a mother and her moral responsibility as a citizen. How could she report her own daughter? But at the same time, how could she stay silent knowing what Emily had done, or was planning to do? She remembered a moment from Emily's childhood, when she was just 5 years old. They had gone to a local fair together, and Emily had been thrilled to win a stuffed animal in a ring toss game. Back then, she had been a happy, innocent child, incapable of hurting anyone. How had she gotten to this point? That night, Mary decided to tell Jack what she had found. It was a difficult conversation, filled with tears and long pauses as she tried to explain the inexplicable. At first, Jack didn't want to believe it. "There must be an explanation," she insisted. "Maybe it's not what it seems." But when Mary showed him the book, he couldn't deny it any longer. The silence that followed was overwhelming. Jack got up from the table and began pacing back and forth, his hands on his head. "What do we do now?" he finally asked. Mary didn't have an answer. When Emily returned that night, the atmosphere in the house was tense. Jack barely looked at her, while Mary tried hard not to break down. Emily, for her part, seemed indifferent, as if she didn't notice the change in her parents. She helped herself to a plate of food and went up to her room without saying a word. That was the last night that the Thompsons could ignore reality. The next morning, Mary and Jack decided they could no longer remain silent. Although it broke their hearts, they knew the only option was to go to the police. Mary took photographs of the book as evidence, fearing that Emily might notice it was missing. She saved the images to a flash drive that she hid in a kitchen drawer. Then, together with Jack, she headed to the local police station. Along the way, neither of them said a word. They both knew that what they were about to do would change their lives forever. Arriving at the Stillwater police station, Mary and Jack sat in the reception area, where the coldness of the place seemed to reflect the state of their hearts. Mary held the flash drive with the evidence as she looked at her husband, seeking strength from him. Jack, though equally despondent, took the lead. "We're here to report a crime," he told the officer on duty. The Thompsons were taken to an interview room, where a detective named Samuel Richards greeted them. Richards was a man in his 50s, with a calm voice and a stern expression. As he listened to Mary's account and examined the photos in the book, his face changed from disbelief to restrained concern. "This is serious," he finally said. "If what they're saying is true, we need to act fast." Richards and his team began investigating the case immediately. They called in a criminal psychology expert to analyze Emily's notes and determine the level of threat she posed. The connections between the victims documented in the book and disappearances in the area confirmed what Mary and Jack feared. Emily had not only planned the crimes, but had likely carried out several of them. While investigators gathered evidence, the Thompsons were taken to a separate room to protect them from any direct confrontation with Emily. Mary couldn't stop crying. "Where did we go wrong?" she repeated over and over. Jack tried to comfort her, but he was also devastated. They both knew that, although they were doing the right thing, they were sacrificing their bond with their daughter forever. That night, officers arrived at the Thompsons' home with an arrest warrant. Emily was in her bedroom when the cops knocked on the door. Mary and Jack had decided not to be present during the arrest, knowing they wouldn't be able to stand it. According to later reports, Emily showed no resistance. When officers informed her she was being arrested for her connection to multiple disappearances, she simply stared at them with a blank expression. "I knew this would happen sooner or later," she said, before holding out her hands to be placed in handcuffs. Emily was taken to the county detention center, where the interrogation process began. Richards, along with a forensic psychologist, attempted to gain information about her motives and how she had carried out the crimes. Although she refused to talk at first, she eventually began to open up, but not in the way they had expected. During interrogations, Emily spoke with a coldness that shook even the most experienced officers. She explained how she had chosen her victims, studied their routines, and gained their trust. "It's not hard," she said. "People trust strangers too much. You just have to say the right words." When asked why she did it, her response was baffling. "There doesn't have to be a reason," she said. "Some are born to build, some are born to destroy. I'm just being who I am." Her lack of remorse made it clear that Emily had no empathy for her victims or the consequences of her actions. Emily Thompson's case became a national news story. The media sensationalized the story, calling her the Stillwater teen predator. Mary and Jack, though they tried to stay out of the public eye, couldn't avoid being dragged into the center of the scandal. Neighbors and acquaintances began to look at them with suspicion, as if they were responsible for their daughter's actions. The trial began in April 2017. Emily, now 19, was charged with multiple counts of first-degree murder and kidnapping. During the trial, Prosecutors presented the book as key evidence, along with expert testimony detailing her methodical and remorseless behavior. Mary attended every session of the trial, though Jack chose to stay home. "I can't look at her," he said one night while watching the news. "I can't face what she's become." Mary, for her part, felt it was her duty to be there, though every day in court was like a dagger in the heart. After weeks of testimony and deliberations, the jury found Emily guilty on all counts. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. When the judge handed down the sentence, Mary felt a mix of relief and devastation. They had succeeded in stopping her, but the emotional toll was unimaginable. Emily, for her part, showed no visible reaction upon hearing her sentence. She simply stood up, looked at her mother one last time, and was escorted from the courtroom. After the trial, Mary and Jack tried to rebuild their lives, but the shadow of Emily's crimes never quite disappeared. Mary began attending therapy, trying to make sense of what had happened. "I always wonder if there was something I could have done to stop it sooner," she confessed during a session. Her therapist reminded her that she was not responsible for her daughter's choices, but the doubts persisted. Jack, for his part, immersed himself in his work as a form of escape. Although he never openly admitted it, the experience left him emotionally distant, and his relationship with Mary was strained. Despite the pain, Mary decided to share her story publicly. She gave interviews to the media and wrote a book titled The Secret Book, A Mother Facing Horror. In it, she talked about the signs she had ignored, the difficult decision to report her daughter, and the impact it had on her family. "I want other parents to know that they are not alone," she wrote, "and that sometimes loving your children means making choices that will protect them from themselves." The book was well received, with many readers praising her for her bravery. However, Mary knew that nothing could erase the pain of losing her daughter in that way. Deep down, Mary never stopped loving Emily. Despite all she had done, she was still her daughter, the same girl who used to help her plant flowers in the garden and who once dreamed of being a writer. But she also knew she had done the right thing. By reporting Emily, she had saved lives, even if it meant losing her own. "The pain never goes away," she said in an interview years later. "But you learn to live with it. And you find strength in knowing that even though it was the hardest decision of my life, it was also the most necessary."